Good morning. I'm Celia Bertoia, daughter of Harry Bertoia, and we're here in St. George, Utah at the Harry Bertoia Foundation. We've got some singing bars going on here. This morning we're going to talk about the gongs, part of the sounding sculptures. The gongs actually came later in Harry's career, but the idea came early on. I'd say it was somewhere around 1960, 62-ish, that we children, Val, Lesta, Celia, we used to play in the pond. We had a small pond, a lake behind the house in Pennsylvania, in Bartow, where I grew up. And we had a wooden raft for a while, and I don't know if that fell apart or sank or whatever, but we were complaining to my dad that we needed some kind of float in the lake. So he made what we called the turtle, which was basically two slabs of metal with air in between so that it would float. And we put that on the pond, and we had fun with that. You know, we could climb on top and push the other kids off, and sometimes the wild turtles would go up there and hang out in the sun. And so that was sort of his first idea of a gong. But then there was actually talk. Well, another thought that he had seemed like from the get-go was the myth of the Aeolian harp, which I believe was a Greek idea. And that would be a harp that you could put outside and the wind would make it sound. And Harry always dreamed of making something like that. In fact, he made numerous monotypes of his version of the Aeolian harp, which would have been a huge piece that went outside and would be played by nature. And the actual first sculptural gong that he made was early on. It was 1956. It looked something like this. It was a heavily textured gong in a frame. And this was in Germany. It was at the embassy building in, let's see, was it Bremen? I believe it was Bremen, Germany. So, yeah, this was way before the more musical gongs. And I don't know if this one was actually intended to be struck and make sounds. No, I've never seen it. I believe it was moved to Dublin, Ireland, not too long ago. They were going to make a sculpture garden there at the embassy in Dublin. That hasn't been confirmed, but maybe if there's someone over in Ireland, you could check it out for us. Let us know. Then there were lots of monotypes that related to gongs, all different kinds of shapes. And there was a whole series of these. And that began in the late 60s, I'd say. But honestly, it wasn't until the 70s that Harry Bertoia got really swinging with the gongs and started making all kinds of gongs. Now here we have one that is simply a single plate of bronze. Now this one is attached on a base, which was done after Harry's life. I don't think Harry really liked to do that. Now, of course, with this Bremen gong that was attached, but now with one like this, you're changing the sound by having these structures touching the actual gong. It changes the whole sound stratosphere. And you can see these two little holes here. They were intended for a thick nylon cord to go through those. And Harry would hang his gongs by the cord. Or he actually had many different methods of hanging his gongs. One was just putting the two holes in there. Sometimes he would put an actual loop that cord could be wrapped around. And we'll see a little later a different kind of U shape that he put the cord through. Now this is a rather unusual gong. We call it the butterfly gong, and this is still in the possession of the Bertoia estate. So he made all kinds of crazy gongs. Now this one too is set upon a base, which Harry wouldn't normally do, but this was done. Now it's hard to find a spot where you can hang a huge gong. This one, I believe, is 5 or 6 feet in diameter. Now you can't just put it in your living room. It doesn't quite work that way. So the stand does make it easier to display. And they're actually quite nice as just a display, but the sound is a big part of this creation. So you can't forget about it. Now, check out that central cutout, which was simply cut out of the single plate of metal to create an interesting design, and then the holes for the rope. Now this slit would actually create basically a longer piece of metal. So that again affected the tone. And Harry, never one to waste material, would take that central cutout piece. You can see this one's not the exact piece, but very similar. And you make that into a gong. So you have a sweet, slender, little gong that would be a lot easier to display. Now I'll strike the little miniature gongs we have here just for fun. Harry had quite a few different instruments, or tools, I should say, that he used in which to play the gongs. Mallets of all sorts. This is just a small one. And this one is store-bought. He would make his own mallets. And he actually would call them clappers. That was just his term. And I think that came from when he was growing up in Italy with the little chapel, and it had a bell tower and the clapper in the bell. He remembered that sound and that word. So he made his own clappers. He also made various small devices, and he had a way, I wish we had a large gong hanging here because I could demonstrate for you. Either with this or just with his thumb, he would get it wet and rub it against the plate, against the metal, and it would make this amazing whining sound. In fact, Jacques Cousteau, who was doing his underwater explorations at that time, actually wrote a letter to Harry after he had heard these gong sounds, and he said, that sounds just like the whales the whales talking to each other. That was kind of cool. He would make all different kinds of patinas. You see, there's a beautiful greenish, bluish patina. Now this one has more of a rope to hang it. Okay, here's another monotype. You can see this is there is a little human back here, hard to distinguish, but this was sort of a double gong. This is a monotype. The monotypes were always used to plan out his larger sculptures. In the early years, the monotypes were just art for art's sake in themselves. But later on, they became an important planning tool for Harry. And when you're working with metal, of course, you have to plan things out because you're talking about huge, heavy materials that takes specific equipment to cut it or shape it or bend it or weld it. So there's a lot of planning involved. And working with the metal, the actual working part takes a long time, and it can be cumbersome. So that's why he liked the monotypes, because they were so quick. And he always said that the monotypes, he would spread ink out on a surface, put the paper on there, and then work from the backside. So he really couldn't even physically see what he was doing. But he said that, you sort of put the intellect and the brain aside, and the creative divine juices just come right through directly onto the paper. So he really liked that technique. But you can see the similarity of this monotype and then this double gong, a huge, I think the diameter of these round gongs is something like 8 feet. They were huge. He made quite a few of those. He also, later in his career, about 1977, he was working with a Norwegian gallery, the Harp gallery in Oslo, Norway, where he actually visited a number of times, and he loved Norway. They had several impressive exhibitions over there. Norwegians seem to love Bertoia. But Kara Berntsen, the owner of the gallery, who's since passed on, suggested to Harry that why didn't he make a limited edition series of jewelry. So Harry experimented. He made pendants such as this, very gong-like. I love this one. We don't own that one. I wish we did. There were several others, and we actually followed up on that idea. In fact, I hadn't heard about that jewelry project that Berntsen wanted to pursue. But I sort of had this idea in my own mind that, gosh, we could take some of Harry's shapes and make them into jewelry. So we made this pendant, which I'm wearing here. This has a silver chain. This is with a leather cord. This was a gong. This was about a 12-foot gong. We reduced it down to about a 2.5-inch pendant. But I had this idea, so we started actually pursuing this project. And then as I was going through the archives, I found these letters between Harry and Kara all about this whole project they wanted to do to come up with limited edition jewelry. And Harry was into it. He said, yeah, let's do it. He came up with all these experiments. There were, I don't know, maybe 20 or so pieces. But it was near the end of his life. He already had lung cancer, and he passed on before it could happen. But in one of the letters, I was very touched. He said something about, yeah, we'll make some special ones for your wife and for Brigitte and Lesta and Celia. We'll make them in gold. And that was sweet. Now here is one of the mallets that Harry made. This one is particularly interesting. It's got that metal design at the tip there. I had never seen one like this, because usually what he did, and this one too, he would cover it with cloth. This part would be covered with some soft cloth and then tied around the neck. And this is just a hammer handle that he would buy at the hardware store. So, and this was basically a baseball. So, you know, Harry, ever the practical one, used a baseball, some spare wire that he had hanging around there, and a hammer handle from the hardware store. And I've seen these mallets now selling at auction for crazy prices, $8,000. I think Harry would be perhaps shocked, maybe pleased, who knows. This is another type of sounding sculpture accessory. This is a sound box, just simply made out of plywood. And these would often be the base for the tonal sculptures. You put the sculpture right on top there. And this would help the sound reverberate and act as sort of a little echo chamber. But one of the reasons that he wanted to make these gongs was to add to his barn collection, the Sonambian barn, which was the old Pennsylvania Deutsch barn that we had in Pennsylvania. And he had that completely remodeled and revamped to turn it into a concert hall of sorts, with a wooden floor, and beneath the floor was what used to be stables. We had it turned into an apartment, but so it was like a huge sound box. You know, you see the concept of the sound box is that you have a chamber and then an opening to help the sound get out. And that's really what the barn was. It was a huge sound box. And the gongs were incredible. He made the single slab gongs, as you've seen so far, but then he also made double-walled gongs. This is one of them, kind of a curved shape with great texture. Now, Harry was never one to make anything simple. So you can see he would hammer a texture and add great patinas. Here's another type of handle or attachment. This was sort of a U shape with a hollow tube, basically a copper tube like what you'd find in residential plumbing, that he would put the cord through. So always thinking ahead, you know, how are you going to hang this thing? So the double-walled gongs, they're the ones that you could make them sound like a whale, and they had a lot of rich texture, not only to the surface but to the sound as well. There's another double-walled gong. This one has fabulous patina, the green and the bumps and everything else. You see a lot of these for sale at auctions. Wanted to just read something here. So Harry was always very specific about how to place his sculptures in an exhibition, how to hang the gongs. And you know, when you're talking about these things that weigh hundreds of pounds, very heavy structures. So you've got to be really careful. You have to make sure it's connected to a beam or some structural frame, because you can't just tack it against the wall or something. In written directions on how to hang a heavy gong for an exhibition, Harry suggested the use of thick white nylon rope or stainless steel rope. The particular gong he was talking about was a larger one. The gong was to be 24 to 30 inches above the floor. Depending on the weight, 2 anchor points might be needed, ideally as far above the gong as the gong was tall. Thus, if you had a 6-foot gong, you'd want the cord above it another 6 feet so that it would distribute the weight evenly. Thus, for a 10-foot gong, the rope should be attached 10 or more feet above the top edge of the gong. A smaller gong would be higher off the floor, maybe 5 or 8 feet. We actually have an article about gongs. You can see more pictures and more details at harrybertoia.org. There's a blog under resources. You'll find a lot of great things there at the website. We also have a store where you can get these pendants. In these crazy COVID times, we appreciate your support, and it always helps to get a little income going. I would like to give credit to Wright Auction and Rago Auction for many of these photos. They take fabulous photos of Bertoia works, and many of these came from their website. So thank you to Richard Wright and his good crew up there. Okay, here is a gong, and he may have been talking about this one when he wrote that instruction about hanging. This is a 10-foot gong. He made a handful of these, and I mean, you look at this picture and okay, nice little rectangle, but that's 10 feet. The thing was huge. We have a very similar one that was hanging in the Sunambient barn, and that thing was absolutely thunderous, so loud. Oftentimes when Harry gave a Sunambient concert, the grand finale would be a good pounding of that 10-foot rectangular gong. And it would, with the wooden floor and this old building, you would just feel the vibrations come right through your feet and kind of erupting. Really a visceral experience. This is a similar gong to that last one. Excuse me. This one's all shiny and beautiful. This one was hanging outside for many years, so you can see all the great patina from rain and bird droppings and whatever else. And Harry loved that. He didn't want his pieces to be sparkly and shiny. He wanted them to be organic and part of nature. I mean, doesn't this look like it belongs out there on that tree? It's great. Now this was a double-walled gong too, and quite heavy. Another interesting tidbit. In December of 1977, Minoru Yamasaki and Harry Bertoia were throwing around ideas for one of Yamasaki's projects. Harry wrote to Yama, as he called him, about a large circular gong. I always wanted to hang a big circular gong, but never found a suitable place to hang it. unless one thinks of Eero Saarinen's St. Louis Arch or your Twin Towers in New York, because clearly you would need a huge support to hang such a large gong. Well, ultimately, he did find a way to hang a huge gong. This gong is 10-foot diameter, and Harry created this pyramidric, is that the word? Structure to hang this gong, which weighed a full ton, 2,000 pounds. And you can actually see the little kitty cat down here for perspective. And this gong was at our home in Bartow, out in the backyard. And Harry's shop was in Bally, which was about 3.5, 4 miles down the road. And one day Harry wanted to find out how loud this gong really was. So he asked his worker to go home and bang on the gong. And this was before cell phones, so they coordinated and synchronized their watches, and said, okay, Harry says, all right, exactly at 10 o'clock, you're gonna pound on the gong. So this was Sam Buttermore, who worked for Harry just a few months. He told me the story. It was great. Sam drove the 10 minutes it took to get to the house, went out to the gong, took the large mallet and gave several good whacks on the gong. And now I've mentioned that one that was in the Sonambient barn that was 10 feet tall, the rectangular one, that was loud. Well, this gong was really loud. If you can imagine a 10-foot gong, and here it is outside. And so he really gave it some good pounding. And then he drove back to the shop. And as he's getting out of the car, Harry's coming out to greet him with a huge smile. So Sam already knew what the answer was. And Harry said, yes, I heard it. 3.5 miles away, I heard the gong. So I think that was part of his dream come true. It wasn't quite an Aeolian harp, which would be played by the wind or by nature. But between his sounding sculptures, which, for example, the ones up in Chicago at the Aeon Center, the wind does play them. They are Bertoia Aeolian harps. I think his dream came true. And here's Harry playing one of the gongs. This was when it was all nice and shiny and new. This was a double-walled gong in the barn, in the Sonambient barn. But the Sonambient barn really was his masterworks, his grand finale, the life summation of his work. And he used to go in that barn almost every night, and he told people, oh yes, I go in the barn for at least an hour a night and practice. To him, it was an instrument. He had always wished he could play an instrument without going through all the years of training, for example, on a violin or a piano. You can't become a master until you've got 10 years under your belt. Well, with the Sonambient barn, anyone could be a maestro. And that was his dream come true. So again, please go to the website, harrybertoia.org, for more information or to support us. Give us a small donation. And we're always happy to take questions. There's contact point there. But we thank you again for being here with us this morning. And I'm not sure how long we'll be continuing with these live feeds because things are starting to open up. But I've enjoyed them and I hope you have too. So thank you so much.